So in that, realizing that people who hate suffer, I can't think of anyone I'm more excited about honoring right now as a heart alchemist than Daryl Davis, who had the strength to need within himself to understand how people like Klansmen could hate him without knowing him, and had the patience and the enormous heart and courage to go with people who hated him for nothing else but the color of his skin, and to slowly listen to them, befriend them, and inspire them to quit forever the Klan and to actually make lasting friendship, and not just a few, but literally hundreds over a 30-year period. So he's an enchanter of a major level. And with that, I would like to call up Daryl Davis, our Grand Honoree of the night. This is an anatomically correct heart, but what's great, you see this plug down here will give you all the right things to light it up. It actually pulses, and so we want you to know, and our plaque to you, our dedication says, Daryl Davis, Heart Alchemist Supreme, Grand Visionary Honoree 2019, American Visionary Art Museum. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Well, thank you all very, very much, and thank you, Rebecca, and the American Visionary Art Museum for having me and even considering me. I never imagined getting an award for the work that I do. It's just something that, hate is something that fascinates me. And I just want to give you just a little bit of background on myself, so perhaps you'll understand why I've done some of these things and why some people call me crazy and all that kind of thing. But as a kid, I was the child of parents in the U.S. Foreign Service. And so we would travel to various countries around the world in the 1960s and early 70s. I was in elementary school. I'll be 61 years old this month. So you're overseas in a country for 2 years. You come back home here to the States. You're around here for a few months or maybe a year, and then back overseas again. So today I'm a professional musician. I got my degree in music from Howard University, and I play all over the country and all around the world. And when you combine my travels as a child with my parents to my travels now as an adult musician, I have been in a total of 56 different countries on 6 continents. So I've literally been exposed to a multitude of ethnicities, cultures, colors, nationalities, religions, etc. And all of that has helped shape my perspectives and who I've become. But to understand it even further, we'll go back to my childhood. When I was in 2nd grade, part of 2nd grade, I spent overseas. So I want to show you a picture of my class overseas. I am the second student from the right in the top row. What you see here is something that you would never see in our country in the early 1960s. You see mixed kids, some black kids, some white kids, an Asian child. A lot of these kids here were from Europe. And you see co-teachers, a white teacher and a black teacher. That was how I attended school overseas, every time I went overseas. Now, 2 years later, that was 1966. 1968, I'm in the 4th grade. Look at my class. This was a newly integrated school. I don't have to tell you where I am, right? Okay? Some of these kids liked me. Some of these kids did not like me, all because of the color of my skin. It was in this class was the first time I was ever called a nigger. And I didn't understand it. It was in this class while I was marching with Cub Scouts in a parade from Lexington to Concord, Massachusetts, we lived nearby, to celebrate the ride of Paul Revere, that I had bottles and rocks thrown at me. And I could not understand. My 10-year-old brain could not get around the idea that someone who had never seen me, someone who had never spoken to me, someone who knew nothing about me would want to inflict pain upon me for no other reason than this, the color of my skin. So I'd go back overseas and I'd be back in that same scenario with a multicultural environment. That's what I was accustomed to. When I was overseas, I was literally living about 12 years into the future because that scenario had yet to come to our country. Today, you walk into a classroom, people are from all over. So I was already prepared for it 12 years in advance. Unfortunately, some of my peers were not. So I formed a question in my mind at the age of 10, which was, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And for the next 50 years, I've been looking for the answer. So I couldn't find it in all the books that I bought. I bought books on black supremacy, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, the Ku Klux Klan, the Nazis in Germany, the neo-Nazis over here. All of my books talked about it, but none of them told me why somebody could hate with no reason. So as an adult, as a musician, I figured, you know what, who better to ask than someone who would go so far as to join an organization that has over a 100-year history of hating people who do not look like them and who do not believe as they believe. So I began seeking out leaders and members of the Ku Klux Klan. I figured I'm going to sit them down and ask them face to face, how can you hate me? You don't even know me. Well, in most cases, when those who would talk to me, there were plenty who would not talk to me, but there were quite a number who would. The answer usually was because black people have smaller brains than white people. Black people are prone to crime. That's why there are more blacks in prison than there are whites. Black people are lazy, we don't want to work, we try to scam the government welfare system. Now, when you're sitting at a table less than 3 feet away from somebody telling you this, in this case it was the head of the Klan for the state of Maryland that I was interviewing, the first interview, telling me this, most people would be offended by that. I was not offended by that. What he was saying was indeed offensive. But why wasn't I offended? Because he wasn't talking about me. He may have thought he was, but I know who I am. I know I don't have a criminal record. I know I've never been on welfare. I've never measured it, but I assume my brain is the same size as anybody else's. Compared to this one right here. Right. So I just let him roll on. But over time, we would find things in common. And he began to humanize me. He invited me, well, I would invite him down to my house. He'd come to my house and talk with me. He'd bring an armed bodyguard with him, and for 2 years, he would even eat lunch and dinner at my dining room table. Now, I'm inferior, all right? So he's eating my inferior food at my inferior table. He never invited me to his house during that 2-year period. He was what was known as a Grand Dragon. Grand Dragon means state leader. After a couple of years, he was promoted to what's called an Imperial Wizard. Imperial Wizard means national leader. He began inviting me to his home. I'd go to his home, I would see his Klan den, where he'd have his meetings. I'd take some pictures, take some notes for my book. And then he began inviting me to Klan rallies. I would go to these Klan rallies. There'd be a lot of Klansmen and Klanswomen in their robes and hoods, and they'd make a big, wide circle around a tall wooden cross. The wooden cross had been wrapped in burlap, and the burlap had been soaked in what they call Klan cologne, which is actually diesel fuel, kerosene. And they march around counterclockwise around the cross carrying these torches. And one of the Klan leaders, either the dragon or the wizard, will shout, "Klansmen, halt," and they all stop. And then he'll say, "For my God," and they all repeat, "For my God," and bow. "For my race, for my race, for my country, for my country, for my clan, white power, white power." Klansmen approach the cross. They all close into the base of the cross. Klansmen light the cross. They toss their torches down at the foot, and then whoosh, the cross is aflame. and they all stand around and admire this burning cross for a while, and then they give some speeches, and the rally was over. So here is a picture of a rally I went to here in Maryland about 20 years ago. You see the light, the fire on the crosses is going out. And this one was just about maybe 3 years ago in the state of Missouri. So I've been doing this now for about 30 years. And what do I do when I'm there with these people? We spend way too much time in this country talking about the other person, or talking at the other person, or talking past the other person. Why don't we spend a little bit of time talking with the other person? So that's what I do. Now I'm going to show you a video of the Klan leader who I met as a Grand Dragon here in Maryland, and went on to become an imperial wizard. He oversaw 13 states. I want you, CNN covered this, and I want you to listen very carefully to what he says. He says that even though he and I, his name is Roger Kelly, even though he and I would do different things together, it did not change his views on the Klan, because his views on the Klan had been cemented in his mind for many years. And then he goes on to say how he believes in separation of the races, because he finds that to be in the best interest of all races. But also listen to what he says about respect. Let's run the CNN clip, please.
This is CNN.
Welcome to this final hour of CNN Sunday Morning. I'm Bob Kane, and today for Miles O'Brien.
Good morning to you all. I'm Joey Chud.
Friendship can transcend all kinds of boundaries.
Just look at us. And two men in Washington area are showing that even an African-American man and a member of the Ku Klux Klan can find common ground. CNN's Carl Rochelle reports.
Daryl Davis plays a hot piano. It's part of the show, and it makes him stand out. He also stands out here. Davis is one of the few African Americans you will ever find attending a KKK rally. More than attending, he is welcome.
I got more respect for that black man than I do you white niggers out there.
It's been a tough day for the Klan. Their Maryland rally found many local residents rejecting the message of white separatism. After it's over, Daryl Davis hangs around backstage with his friend, Klan wizard Roger Kelly. It's not unusual for blacks and whites to be friends, but it is unusual to find a black man and a Klan leader chatting pleasantly over an orange soda after a Klan rally. The relationship started over a book Davis was writing. His secretary set up an interview with Roger Kelly, but didn't tell him Davis was black. They talked and talked some more. Davis learning about the Klan, Kelly learning about Davis.
We get to know one another and we do different things, It hasn't changed my views about the Klan, because my views on the Klan's been pretty much cemented in my mind for years.
Kelly and his Klan friends go to hear Davis and his band. And Davis goes to their rallies.
I sat on the front row and listened to each Klansman speak. Some things I agreed with, other things I did not agree with.
Davis thinks that his presence promotes badly needed understanding.
Hate stems, I believe, from fear of the unknown, and I think this is all across the board, regardless of whether it's a Klansman or anything else.
But he has no illusions about the Klan. If he did, his friend would be quick to disabuse them.
And I believe in separation of the races. I believe that's in the best interest of all races.
Does he really? Or has friendship transcended the color barrier? Listen to Kelly at a Klan rally.
I will follow that man to hell and back, because I believe in what he stands for and he believes in what I stand for. A lot of times we don't agree with everything, but at least he respects me to sit down and listen to me. And I'll respect him to sit down and listen to him.
The strange relationship of a KKK wizard and his black buddy. In Washington, I'm Carl Rochelle, CNN Sunday Morning.
Strange. Good adjective, strange.
Certainly not.
Okay. So now you heard, thank you. You heard Roger Kelly say that even though he and I would do different things together, it did not change his views on the Klan, because his views on the Klan had been what? Cemented in his mind for years. And he goes on to say how he believes in separation of the races, because he finds that to be in the best interest of all races. But he said something very, very important that I want you all to take home with you if you don't take anything else home tonight. All right? What he said about respect. Did you hear the Imperial Wizard said that he respected me? What's that all about? We're enemies. I'm a black guy who's in the Klan. A couple years before that, my brain was small and I was inferior and I was on welfare and a criminal. And now 2 years later, a little over 2 years later, he respects me. What he said was, we may not agree on everything, but at least he respects me to sit down and listen to me, and I respect him to sit down and listen to him. Very important words. If you have an adversary, it doesn't have to be about race. In fact, let's take race off the table. There are enough hot topics out here that you can deal with. Abortion, global warming, nuclear weapons, the war in the Middle East, the current presidency, whatever. You're on one side, somebody's on the other side. Give your opponent a platform. Allow them to air their views, regardless of how extreme they may be. If you agree with them, fine, no big deal. If you don't agree with them, it's still fine, no big deal. You challenge them, but you don't do it violently or rudely. You say, look, I need a little more clarification as to why you think I should believe that way. So after they give you their explanation, there's a good chance that they will reciprocate and give you a chance to present your platform so that you can explain your point of view. And you each must think about what the other person is saying. So even long after my book came out, I would continue getting together with Roger Kelly. We'd go out and have dinner. Sometimes we talk about the Klan. Sometimes we talk about the latest James Bond movie and not even mention the Klan, just, whatever was going on. Over time, that cement that he talked about that held his ideas together began to get cracks in it because we were listening to each other. We may not agree on everything, but at least he respects me to sit down and listen to me. And I respect him to sit down and listen to him. Those are his words. And that's what he applied. And over time, that cement cracked. And over more time, those cracks began to crumble the cement. And a few years ago, a little over a few years ago, Roger Kelly quit the Ku Klux Klan because he no longer believes in what he said in that video. When he left the Klan, he gave me his robe and hood. And this is the robe that you saw him wearing in the video clip, the robe of the Imperial Wizard. And, of course, this is what's called the hood or the helmet. Members who want anonymity, they have the mask attached to the hood by 3 snaps. You don't see them, they see you. They peep at you through these eyelets. If they don't care that their identity is revealed, the mask has 3 snaps or Velcro. They just detach the mask and the face is exposed under the hood. And you saw both types in that video clip, those with their faces exposed or covered and those with their faces exposed. This does not come by fighting and yelling and screaming and beating up people and being violent and talking about each other or talking at each other. It comes through conversation, it comes through love, it comes through dialogue and patience. And that's what I try to apply. Now, this was a few years ago. Let me show you something a little current. You all remember about a month ago, a man named Robert Bowers, a white supremacist named Robert Bowers, walked into a synagogue in Pittsburgh and shot up a bunch of people. You remember that? You remember just a few days ago, a lieutenant in the Coast Guard was arrested where I live, down in Silver Spring, Maryland, a white supremacist who was stockpiling weapons to go shoot up people, Democrats and journalists. This Silver Spring may not be Baltimore, Charlottesville may not be Baltimore, but trust me, it can happen anywhere. I'm going to show you this next guy right here. Pause it for 1 second, if you would. He was a chief petty officer. He went on to become a neo-Nazi leader and the Grand Dragon of the Klan in Florida. He did not like me a couple years ago. About a year ago, he began reaching out to me. He met a black guy down there where he lives in his apartment complex who's a member of a black church down there. And they got to talking. He began teeter-tottering, not quite sure what to believe, what not. And he reached out to me. And he emailed me. I emailed him back. He sent me his number, wanted me to call him. I called him, gave him my number, and we would talk. And I listened to his philosophy, listened to what he had to say. He did not like black people. He was vehemently opposed to Jewish people. And we talked a whole lot. He wanted me to come and meet him. And I didn't have time to go down there right then. But another former neo-Nazi white supremacist, a friend of mine, knew him. And he kept telling this guy to keep calling me, and try to get to meet me. And so he did. And I had a gig down in Florida back in September. This guy was well on his way to becoming the next lone wolf that you would hear about walking into a synagogue and shooting up people. He had the Klan logo, which is, where is it? This thing here is called a Mayoke, or blood drop emblem. He had that tattooed on one side of his chest, and he had a swastika tattooed on the other side of his chest. Well, I went down there, I had a day off, and so I went over to Jacksonville to meet with him. He was ready to get out. And he gave me his Klan robe and all his Klan stuff and all his neo-Nazi stuff. But I want to show you how you see a nice, good-looking guy in our military. They come from all walks of life, folks. Don't think it's just the third-grade dropout that you see on Jerry Springer throwing chairs around and things like that. They come from all different walks of life, all socioeconomic backgrounds and education. So he went from this, we can go ahead and play, he went from this to becoming this. And listen to what he says. All Jews are homosexuals, and they should be exterminated, every last one of them. There he is.
Jews and homosexuals, they should be exterminated, every single one of them. Mainly what you came for, but...
Now there he is giving me his Grand Dragon robe.
And this is the hood where they never put eyes in it. So I had to tuck it up inside to wear it. Right. I can see where I'm going. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And this is a belt that goes with it.
Where's all that stuff going, Daryl?
It is going into my museum. Here he is having his tattoos removed. It hurts more to have them taken off by laser than it does to have them put on.
It'd be my pleasure to help him remove those and start a new life. It just goes to show that people can really change.
Okay, there's the guy from his church and another friend of mine. So this is what goes on in my life, and the work continues. Now, a lot of people find it easy to talk to people through email, through their cell phone. We can talk to people right next door in Pennsylvania or California, Australia, Europe, Africa, China. We can even talk to people live on the moon. While Neil Armstrong was walking around on the moon talking about one small step for a man and one giant leap for mankind, we were able to talk to him live. via satellite radio phone? How is it that we can talk to people all over this planet and as far away as the moon, but some of us have difficulty talking to the person who lives right next door because he or she is a different color, a different persuasion, a different religion, a different whatever? So it seems to me that before we can truly call ourselves the greatest, our ideology needs to catch up to our technology. And once we have them both up there, then we can truly brag about how great we are. And as I said, this work continues. And it can happen anywhere here, folks. Let's stop talking about each other, stop talking at each other, stop talking past each other, and let's start talking with each other. The two news desk anchor people there at CNN, at the end of that clip, you saw they implied that I was strange. Well, that's okay. Because if being strange causes people to give up stuff like that and like that, we all need to be strange. Thank you all very much.
So, I was told we didn't need a proper introduction. Mr. Daryl Davis.
All right. Got a couple numbers for you. Let's talk a little boogie woogie here for you.